Shalom, and thank you for listening to sermons from Tikvat Israel, a Messianic synagogue in the heart of Richmond, Virginia. Listening to the podcast is great, but we would love to meet you in person. All are welcome, and that includes you. So if you want the full experience, please join us Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. for our worship service at the corner of Arthur Ashe Boulevard and Grove in the historic synagogue across from the Art Museum. Can't make it in person? No problem. We are also live streaming on YouTube. Contact our administrator at tikvatdirector@gmail.com for the link during the week, or contact us on our website, tikvatisrael.com. There, you can also support the ministry, learn more about Messianic Judaism, and find helpful resources. May Hashem bless you through the hearing of His word.
This week, we began the month of ELUL, a time of introspection, rebirth, and renewal. And today, we read from Parashat Shoftim, in which leadership may not be what it seems. So I wanted to start with Theseus's ship to go into the paradox of leadership. You may wonder how long I can go on with the rhymes. I can assure you, my friends, a very long time. But I won't, I'll stop there. Last week we spoke of the riddle of Isaiah, and today we will talk about the riddle's cousin, the paradox. Ooh, doo-doo. All right, thank you. That's my sound guy over there. First, what is a paradox? One definition from the Oxford English Dictionary says this: it is a person or thing that combines contradictory features or qualities. A famous paradox that I just mentioned is the ship of Theseus. And here it is. Imagine a ship that at every port gets one of its boards replaced as it wears out. This continues board by board and port by port until every single piece of the ship has been replaced by another. The question is it now a different ship, or is it the same ship as when it started? It's a paradox. Here are some quotes that are paradoxical. This is from the great Jewish sage Groucho Marx. I don't care to belong to any club that will have me as a member. That's what he said. And then Yogi Berra said something very similar. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. It kind of makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense. Our final quote is a bit more substantive and famous within Judaism. It's from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, which is from the Mishnah, the earliest part of the Talmud, the Jewish writings. And this is what it says. And this is from Pirkei Avot 1:14. Hillel used to say, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" Isn't that really nice little phrase, nice little paradox? And with this paradoxical statement in mind, we're now going to turn to the paradox of leadership. The paradox of leadership. Let's dive into the beginning of the Parsha with this guiding question from Hillel. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? The Parsha Shoftim, this week's Parsha, begins in Deuteronomy 16:18. Let's check it out. Judges and officers you are to appoint within all your gates, that Adonai your God is giving you, according to your tribes. They are to judge the people with righteous judgment. The word for judges is the same word as the name of the Parsha, of course, right? That's the first significant word. What's the name of our Parsha this week? Shoftim. All right, Torah point there. I think somebody here said it. Who gets a Torah point? All right, somebody back there. Wonderful. So Shoftim. This is also the name of one of the books of the Bible. Does anyone know which book is called Shoftim? Shoftim. But what does that mean? What is the English translation of it? Judges, right? Isn't there a book of Judges? Yes, there is. When you hear the word judges, what do you think of? Probably something like fancy wig, or maybe you think of someone like Judge Judy, right? Or maybe you think of Kevin. He's also a judge, right? Yes, okay. He's confirming that. But the Shoftim, the word for judge in Hebrew, they were not like that. There's a book known as Shoftim, as I mentioned, and these individuals are not like Judge Judy. They are charismatic leaders who lead at a time when there was no king. And there's a repeated phrase in the book of Shoftim, and it says, because there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's correct. The Shoftim in the time of the Judges and the time of Deuteronomy, a little bit earlier, what were they? They were leaders. They helped the people with conflict or interpreting the Torah, specifically to decide if there was something controversial so that they could bring shalom. So the leaders, the Shoftim, are to help the people, especially when there's no king and everybody just does whatever they think is right. But it ends in chaos and rebellion. So the Shoftim are there to help. Let's look at the whole passage about the Shoftim in context, about the judges. This is, again, Deuteronomy 16, starting in verse 18. Judges and officers you are to appoint within all your gates that Adonai your God is giving you, according to your tribes. They are to judge the people with righteous judgment. You are not to twist justice. You must not show partiality or take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and distorts the words of the righteous. Justice, justice, tzedek, tzedek, you must pursue, so that you may live and possess the land that Adonai your God is giving you. You are not to plant for yourself an Asherah pole of any kind of wood beside the altar of Adonai your God that you make for yourself, nor are you to set up a pillar for yourself. Adonai your God hates this. A judge or leader who accepts a bribe does so because they're putting themselves ahead of the people that they're supposed to help. Power and authority tend to corrupt. So the Torah reminds the leaders to set boundaries, right? Not to abuse their status. This is the paradox of leadership. Those with authority are in some ways distinct, and they are raised up, and they are confident, and they have convictions, but in many ways they need to remember that they are not there to rule, they are there to do what? To serve others, especially the poor and the lowly. And so by taking bribes, they are doing a disservice. They're hurting the poor and the lowly. There's also a reminder here about avoiding altars, setting a boundary on our worship, so that I think there's a connection between the ego here and idolatry. In other words, if they're accepting bribes, pride is connected to putting other things before God. Those things go together, pride and idolatry. So if this is true, then the opposite also must be true. If we have humility, what goes with humility? Worshiping the Lord alone. Let's continue. This is from Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 8. It's a little further. Suppose that a matter arises that is too hard for you to judge, over bloodshed, legal claims, or assault, matters of controversy within your gates. This is what the judges were supposed to do, right? Then you should go up to the place Adonai your God chooses and come to the Levitical Kohanim, the priests, and the judge in charge at the time. And you will inquire, and they will tell you the sentence of judgment. You are to act according to the sentence they tell you from that place Adonai chooses, and take care to do some of what they instruct you, half, all, there you go, all that they instruct you. You are to act according to the instructions they teach you and the judgment they tell you. You must not turn aside from the sentence they tell you to the right or to the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not listening, shema'ing, to the Kohen who stands to serve there before Adonai your God, or to the judge, the Shoftim, the judges, that man must die. So you are to purge the evil from Israel. Then all the people will hear and be afraid and not act presumptuously again. Here's where the judges or leaders or priests are given some serious authority, aren't they? This is the other side of the paradox. The judges, in order to function, they can actually make halakha, which is the interpretation of the Torah, and it is binding as if God himself had made that ruling. The people have to listen to their interpretation of the law. Taken with the earlier passage, this gives us kind of good boundaries for understanding what is required for leadership, right? Earlier, we understand that a judge needs to be upright and they need to be without corruption so that when they are given this immense authority, they can do it with the balance of leadership, with uprightness. Or as many people have told Spider-Man, with great power. Thank you. I was hoping you'd fill it in there. Comes great responsibility. We only have a couple of people that are, all right, that's all right. With great power comes great responsibility, as many people have told Spider-Man. That's right. Now, the next part of the Parsha is really, I think, the heart of it. But there's another paradox here. And there's an interesting question I'm going to ask you. Should Israel have a king? Should they have a king? What do you think? Who votes yes? They should have a king. Who votes no? Should not have a king. And who is in the middle? Well, you could look at it both ways. All right, interesting. Okay, well, let's take a look. When you come to the land that Adonai your God is giving you, possess it and dwell in it, and you say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations around me. You will indeed set over yourselves a king whom Adonai your God chooses. Isn't the wording of that interesting? I think it's interesting. One from among your brothers will be appointed as king over you. You must not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he should not multiply horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to multiply horses, because Adonai has said to you, you must never go back that way again, nor should he multiply wives for himself, so that his heart does not turn aside, nor multiply much silver and gold for himself. If only Solomon had seen this, he would have helped him out a lot. He basically did all three of those. It's okay. We're learning from him. Is this a concession or permission? Or is it a last resort? Or is it a recommendation? Right? When you say, I want a king like all the other nations. At this point, they don't have a king. Who do they have? They have Moses. But God is saying, look, I know you guys, and I know you like to be like the other nations. Even though I've made you distinct, I know your preferences. I know you don't like to be left out. But mom and dad, the ancient Canaanites have a king. Why can't I have a king? Every other nation in our neighborhood has a king. It's not fair. Well, I suppose if the ancient Canaanites were to jump off a bridge or sacrifice their children to Molech, you'd do that too. No. Gosh. So the part of the impetulant tween here is, of course, Israel, and the part of the parents is played by God, but you get the drift in the conversation, hopefully. And eventually, what happens to Israel? Do they get a king? They do, right? And there's another conversation. This time they're talking to Samuel, who's actually one of the Shoftim. He's a charismatic leader that helps them into this new era of the kings. He's sort of the bridge. So the people approach Samuel and they say what? Samuel, we want a king. We want to be like all the other nations. And God and Samuel go back to them and they say, no, you don't want a king. God is your king. And the people say, yes, give us a king. We want to be cool like the Canaanites. We don't want a heavenly king. We want a human king that we can see and go up to him and like, hey, that's our king. And God and Samuel say, but the king is going to take your best crops and take your children away from you and tax you up the wazoo. We don't care. Give us a king. Okay. So the Lord, yeah, okay. Right? So here it's kind of a concession. And God says to Samuel, okay, let them have a king. They don't want me to be their king. That's fine. But in the future, I'm going to use this choice, actually, to redeem you and all of humanity through this king that they chose. Not Saul, but David. Because there's going to be a son of David, a descendant of David, that will redeem all of Israel and all of humanity. Isn't the sovereignty of God so amazing? He used that concession, right? Give us a king. I'm being a little teenager, right? Okay. I can do that, but I can still use that. He's sovereign over our choices. What's another word for sovereign? Kingly. He's the ultimate king, right? He's the King of Kings. The first king that Israel affirmed was Saul. We recognize that. But after that, King David, a man after God's own heart. And God worked in and through this man to bring the future Messiah, the son of King David, who is king over all. Think about the sovereignty of God over this choice. God is the real king, the sovereign, who can work with whatever choices we make to bring the redemption of the world, because he's just that kingly. He's just that awesome. Going back to the Deuteronomy passage, we notice that even if Israel should get their way, the king still has limits. He has boundaries on his behavior that he is supposed to do that would limit his pride, limit his ego, so that he can rule with justice, just like the judges had limits. And as we will see, all of these leaders have some sort of limit. And this next part seals the deal. Not only is he not supposed to get many horses and lots of gold and lots of wives, but this next part is a really strong limit on the king. This is what it says. Now, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself a copy of this Torah on a scroll from what is before the Levitical kingdom. It will remain with him, and he will read it all the days of his life in order to learn to fear Adonai his God and keep the words of this Torah and these statutes. Then his heart will not be exalted above his brothers, and he will not turn from the commandment to the right or the left, so that he may prolong his days in the kingship, he and his sons, in the midst of Israel. The king himself has to do what? He has to write the Torah, and then copy it, right? And then he has to read it every day. He has to read it regularly. In the ancient Near East, there was nothing like this. If you wanted to be a king at any time, it would be the ancient Near East. Why is that? You get to do whatever you want, right? Not in Israel. It's good to be the king. Well, wrong. It's not. It's not so good. The Torah rules over the king, not the other way around. And only then, if the Torah is ruling over the king, can the king rule over the people and actually serve the people. Serve the people with justice and integrity. I mean, this is the kind of leader we want, right? Now, I hear there's some sort of important election coming up in this land. I don't know that much about it. Have you heard anything about it? Yeah? Is it presidential? Yeah? Okay. I just felt everyone like tense up. What's he going to say? Well, I think for this we need to turn again to the sage, the Jewish sage, Jerry Seinfeld. He wrote this about the campaign in 1988, but I think it still has some wisdom, and it talks about leadership. This is a quote, Campaign 88. I bet a lot of Americans are thinking the same thing about it. In the back of your mind, you're like, I'm sure once the actual election rolls around, there'll be other choices. Once the word gets out that they're hiring presidents, there'll probably be lots of new people coming in. I'm sure these are just placeholders for now, probably. Just the fact that someone thinks they should be the president is proof that they're quite mentally off. What kind of person is this that sits around, let's see, who should be the most powerful person in government? Commander-in-chief of the armed forces, leader of the free world. You know, I've got to say, that sounds like me. It sounds like something I would be good at. I really strike myself as the best person there could possibly be for that kind of job. No, you're not. You're sick and deranged. Who could be friends with this person? You're at a ball game. You know, I was thinking about becoming the most powerful person in the world. You go, I was thinking about getting a hot dog. Unquote. This is a great example of the paradox of leadership. The authority that it comes with makes it a delicate act because the influence can go to your head. So what do we have to help us? The Torah warns us, but you just have to look around to see it. I've seen leaders pursue likes and clicks and fame and all kinds of things. Kind of gets to your head, right? It's very enticing, the authority. But the boundary of sticking to the Torah, and other boundaries that are in place here is going to help us from our ego inflating. In the governing structures in the Torah, there are also checks and balances that prevent the absolute authority of the king, much like the checks and balances in our government. One such check is the role of the prophet. This is also brought forth in this week's Parsha, interestingly, and Clarine read it a little bit earlier. This is from Deuteronomy 18, starting in verse 15. Adonai your God will raise up for you a prophet like me, that's Moses, from your midst, from your brothers. To him you must... Listen, Shema. This is just what you asked of Adonai your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, when saying, I cannot continue to hear the voice of Adonai my God or see this great fire anymore, or I will die. What he's talking about is the people were scared of the very presence of the Lord. So they were like, give us a mediator so that it's more comfortable for us. Give us a person, the prophet, that will speak the words of the Lord, because the very presence of the Lord is so awesome and terrifying, right? And so that's why they were asking for the prophet. And that's the role that Moses played. But he's saying there will be another prophet that will come forth later, the prophet that we must, of course, listen to. Adonai said to me, they have done well in what they have spoken. I will raise up a prophet like you for them from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command him. Now whoever does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account. What does that sound like? Sounds like authority. Sounds like this prophet will have the authority of God, and all of Israel has to do what? Listen to him, okay? That's Yeshua, right? Okay. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet will die. Again, there's a boundary on it. It's not absolute authority. Now, should you say in your heart, how would we recognize the word that the Adonai has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in Adonai's name and the word does not happen or come true, that is a word that Adonai has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. Do not be afraid of him. So Israel has to listen to a lot of people, right? They have to listen to who? The judges. They have to listen to the prophet. And eventually, not in this time, but when they do get a king, they have to listen to the king. But all of these leaders are held to account for their authority. They need an immense authority. They need an immense courage of their convictions to do what they're doing to lead the people, right? That's what's required of leadership. But also, paradoxically, they have to be totally empty and recognize that the Torah rules them, and totally humble. And it's a very difficult thing, but it's a very important thing. The king must read the Torah. The judges must not take bribes, and the prophet must not lead the people astray. These are all boundaries. A leader must be at the same time for themselves, but not only for themselves. And we are all leaders. We're all leading something. Even if it's just, I'm directing my own soul. I'm the king of this area, right? We're leading ourselves, but many of us are also leading other things. We're leading things in our families. We're leading ministries. We're leading projects. We're leading things at work, right? And the Torah has given us a formula, a paradox to do that. We need to have confidence that God has called us, but also we need to have boundaries so that we can remain humble. We cannot only be for ourselves, but we need to be for ourselves and understand that God has called us and given us a purpose. This kind of paradoxical leader is found in this week's Haftorah portion. Sort of. Remember what I said earlier, the traditional Haftorah portions go all around the second half of Isaiah, but they skip over the end of Isaiah 52 and Isaiah 53. And this passage is what our founding rabbi, Jamie Cowan, calls a no-brainer in terms of who it's about. But let's take another look at it through the lens of leadership. Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. What does that sound like? Sounds like authority. Just as many were appalled at you, his appearance was disfigured more than any man, his form more than the sons of men. So he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths because of him, for what had not been told them they will see, and what they had not heard they will perceive. So this sounds like a person who is both full of authority. King has some authority over all the nations and is king over the kings of the nations, causing the great kings to shut their mouths in awe. And yet, at the same time, he is lowly, he is afflicted and pained. You see the word sprinkled. Where does that Hebrew word occur? It occurs in Leviticus for the sprinkling of the blood on the altar. This person will be above the nations, but also will be poured out for the nations. This is the paradox of kingship, the paradox of leadership that Yeshua embodies perfectly. He will be for himself in a sense, right? And if you read the Gospels, he was about his Father's business. He was confident. He spoke with authority. The Torah teachers were like, who is this guy? He speaks with authority. They couldn't understand it. He understood that his mission was to the Jewish people. And he said that. I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He was about what he was about, and yet he was not about himself at the same time. He was totally open and totally humble and totally submitted to his Father. And this is our example. Let's continue in Isaiah 53, starting in verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our pains, yet we esteemed him stricken, struck by God and afflicted, because he was pierced because of our transgressions, crushed because of our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace, our shalom, was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Is this the same person that we were just talking about? The one that has all authority over all the kings of the earth? It's the same person. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. So Adonai has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Reminds us of the time of the judges, right? Each of us was doing what was right in our own eyes, so the Lord raised up a leader. He was oppressed and was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, like a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Because of oppression and judgment he was taken away. As for his generation, who considered? He was cut off from the land of the living, which means what? He died. For the transgression of my people, the stroke was theirs. His grave was given with the wicked. It's another reference to death. And by a rich man in his death, death means death, though he had done no violence, nor there was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased Adonai to bruise him. He caused him to suffer. If he makes his soul a guilt offering, he will see his offering. He will, what? He will what? Prolong his days. How is he going to prolong his days if he died? I'll let you answer that. The will of Adonai will succeed by his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied by his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion with the great. He will divide the spoil with the mighty, because he poured out his soul to death and was counted with transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and interceded for the transgressors. This is, of course, about who? Yeshua the Messiah. But he is our example. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? The last question means it's today, right? We are now in ELUL, as I said before, and the time has come for us to begin turning toward the King, turning toward the one who is this perfect, paradoxical leader. That means we take time to anchor ourselves to the Torah, to set boundaries on our lives, because our lives we've just sort of been doing what we think is right in our own eyes, right? And it's time to set boundaries on it from the Torah. It's time to anchor ourselves, to renew those boundaries, because those boundaries keep us humble. And we need to be humble because we have a lot of authority, because we're also kings. So we need that. We need the boundaries to keep our lives humble and keep us secure. It means that now is the time to be for others as much as we are for ourselves. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? If I have to be for myself, but if I'm only for myself, what good is it? It's no good. I have to love my neighbor as I love myself. It means this is the time where we go to others, where we think maybe they have something against us and we want to work it out. Or we have something against them. We have an offense against them and we try to work it out. This is the time. If not now, when? in the month of Elul. The king is coming, the paradoxical king. We are encountering the king very soon. He is both high and lifted up, and he is low and despised. And we are to emulate him as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Abba, Father, thank you for your leadership, your kingship over us. We are your sheep. You are a good shepherd. We are your servants. You are a good king. We are your children. You are a good father. Lord, we thank you for your example, the example of the paradoxical leadership. Help us to take this time to set boundaries, to dig into your Torah, to be like the king was supposed to be in Deuteronomy, that copied the Torah and then read the Torah every day and acknowledge that your law is above us, even though we have been given much authority in your name. But at the same time, we are your children and we are your servants. Help us to maintain that paradox of authority and humility in our relationship with you, and to take this time during Elul to reconnect with you and reconnect with others, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.